Greetings, everyone. I am Dr. Mama Noni, and I'm here to share with you some of the experiences that I have had recently at the Rice Museum in South Carolina. A Sankofa journey I took with my students. Um, we went down March 11th, and we were there for 3 days. But before I go any further, I just want to give thanks to my ancestors and give thanks to my mom and dad who helped start Sya Academy, which is an African Center school here in Durham, North Carolina. Um, so I was really fascinated. If you've ever been to South Carolina, one of the places that I would encourage everyone to go would be, in addition to the Penn Center and the museum, the International African American Museum, would be the Rice Museum. There was a lot of history there about the rice culture and the technology that Africans poured into that space to make the South Carolina economy uh, rice is gold. And so it was literally an empire during the 1700s, of a financial empire that was the second wealthiest colony in what we now call the United States. Um, so I wanted to begin with one of the things that our tour guide shared with us, and it was a boat. It's called the Brown Ferry Vessel, and it was found in the Black River in 1976. And what was significant about this boat is that it was designed like an African, traditional African vessel. It is the oldest maritime vessel in the United States. It is believed that it was built in 1725 and it sank in 1730, between 1735 and 1740, as a result of carrying like 25 tons of bricks and other merchandise uh, down the river from one plantation to a marketplace or whatever in Charleston. What is also significant is that it's considered uh, is that it was 50 feet long. The base of it was a flat boat um, with a ribbed caged design, which is an indicative of a African design concept. Um, the other thing that was significant is that it predated the shipbuilding industry of of the Americas, which showed that while Europeans were building ships and crossing the Atlantic Ocean, what they had not mastered apparently was ships that could navigate small rivers, um, and small marshy areas. And of course, that was not geography that was indigenous to Europe, but it was so they wouldn't have had that opportunity to even think about constructing stuff like that. But it was something that Africans were um, were known for and had even though they were on the coast, just like Europeans were on the coast, these were skills that they had developed. And apparently, for over, well, we know Black people have been on the planet for what, 300,000 years. So there's no date really of when we started. But it's interesting that that was the first ship found. The oldest ship found in the United States was a African design ship. So, um, what I found is this lady named Lynn Harris, Dr. Lynn Harris, who is a PhD, did research on a comparison between shipbuilding in North America or along the in Georgia, Florida, North Carolina, South Carolina, and compared it to West African cultures to kind of verify that this ship was indeed an African vessel. What she did was she looked at the different styles of boats that are in shipping communities or boating communities from Mali, Gambia, Senegal, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Ivory Coast, Ghana, Togo, Benin, all the way around to Congo, Gabon. Let's see, uh, Central African Republic, Congo, and Angola. So she looked at the continuity of between. I mean, she took all of those countries and looked at what their boating techniques were. How did they build their ships? Their boats. What were the uses of these boats? How did they? What were the spiritual connections with their boats? What were some of the individual markings that Africans put on their boats to say, "Hey, this is mine. I'm expressing myself through this particular craft that I have designed." Um, Boats could be small canoes, pirogues. I think that's another word they use for them, as 10 feet with maybe 4 or 5 people on them, to as large as 80 feet, accommodating up to 100 people. Um, my folks, who are the crew people of West Africa, uh, designed those 80-foot boats. And they were used for fishing, they were used for sporting and gaming, they were used for, let's see, racing. They were used, they had all kinds of different types of boats. One, she said, people use their feet to paddle versus, and they designed it with a surfboard kind of look, and they used their feet to paddle through the boat. They had boats where you had seating in the center, that was elevated for the person who was paddling, and the sections that were in the front and in the back were set very low so people to sit. You had boats where you had folks were like lodging boats, like some of the boats we see where people are ferrying across, that were large enough to accommodate. Let's see, sorry, that were large enough to accommodate people. Cooking on these boats. They were People could sleep on the boats, and they were also for just ferrying merchandise and all that. So that is literally a tradition that Europeans documented when they came into contact with Africans beginning in the 1400s, 1470s, and with the Portuguese all the way through, the British and the French and the Dutch, German contact. They themselves documented the things that Africans were doing with these boats. Their boats were very colorful. They would be designed with nods to deities, ocean, water deities, other natural deities, the deities associated with water, um, you know, clams, fish, sharks, all of these things. And also, Africans had developed a way of, you know, um, mastery of currents. They built navigational skills across the ocean. Which would have required their knowledge of constellations. I think I've talked about that in a previous session, and also their just an understanding of waterways. And so what we see is that they literally took all of this knowledge of boating, of designing craft for specific areas and for specific jobs, and all of that intelligence, all of that technology, all of that craftsmanship was carried across the ocean and brought to the States, to aid and develop this, what we call this capitalist, this country where our skills were used to the benefit of other people. Why affirmative action? I can take your skills and not pay you. I take advantage of your gifts and not pay you for that, and then take credit for it and da da da. Um, the other thing that Dr. Harris presented was a history of boating. And that I found that to be very interesting. I'm going to read something here for, real quickly. The history of boating. So she has here that okay. So in the oldest boat found in Africa was dated 8,000 years ago. The boat, well, it was dated 8,000 years ago. It was found in 1987 by a Fulani uh, uh, cattle worker during in Nigeria. And what he and his discovery was that the boat was in pretty good condition, and it was excavated and carbon dated and approximated at 8,000 years old, which made it the third oldest boat in the world. Now, of course, the first older boats were found in the Netherlands, and the other one was found in France. Now, what was interesting is that this young man named Peter Brunig, uh, who of the University of Frankfurt in Germany, who is an archaeologist in maritime transport, said that while the dating on the um, African boat was 8,000 years, because of the craftsmanship of the boat, it was deemed superior to the 12,000-year-old boats found in the Netherlands and France. And so he concluded, this German professor, that while the 8,000-year-old boat was um, a younger boat, or carbon dated at a younger at 8,000 or 4,000 years behind the 12,000-year-old boat, its the technology of that boat was more advanced than the European boats, which indicated that perhaps, I mean, well, the natural conclusion is that boating in the boating skills of Africans was advanced, had been around for a long time, and and their skill set was at a higher level than the Europeans boat construction. And I believe that all of that should support the notion that Abubakari II, so Abubakari II is the 1300s. He, if our ancestors were crafting boats that were superior to European boats, and they were at 8,000 years ago, then it is perfectly reasonable that by 1300, which is almost 9,300 years later, we would have been able to, well, much longer older than that. It's like thousands of years later, almost 1,000 years or over 1,000 years later, we would have been able to develop a boat and 200 ships to cross the Atlantic in 1300s. I think it was at least, Columbus came in 1492, so I think it was 100 years before Christopher Columbus came over here that Abubakar II uh, brought 200 ships across the Atlantic from Mali to and he landed in Brazil. And then, of course, there's evidence of his of Africans being in that area, in Mexico and Brazil, and all throughout the Caribbean, because when Columbus came, he transcribed in his journals that the indigenous people, the Taino people, which I'm not sure if that's the word they want to be called, but that's one of the indigenous people of those Caribbean islands said, "Hey, black people were here, and they shared some gold with us. In fact, they gave us these gold tips on these spears, and yeah, they were here a long time ago, before you came." And so it authenticates, it supports that idea of Abubakar II coming across the ocean, because it wouldn't have been a big deal if we had already begun the technology of of boats and boating and shipping and moving across the street, developing boats that could carry food, and you could cook on the ship, and if you could create sleeping arrangements and have compartments for stowage and all of that, then of course by 1300s you're able to do this thing, no biggie. And so um that was fascinating to me, and those are the things that I was considering as I was learning this information. um the other thing that struck me was that Africans joined with indigenous people here in the States during in South Carolina for espionage. They used their crafts for espionage, and it was documented that there were that they were conducting this espionage on behalf of the Spanish, who were who hated the British, and they were constantly at war. And so the Spanish were given uh, uh, messages about merchandise or um, products that would be located at certain plantations, and then they would go and raid these places. But that information was being traded on the waterways by Africans and indigenous people. And so I think she said in like 1706, I can't remember the exact year, but the British had to create laws that if they found Africans in crafts, that they could be punished severely. They had to have permission. All of a sudden they were being surveilled now and managed, and they were now forced by force. They had to now train uh, the British on their covert surveillance skills. So now the British were literally using the same methods of covert surveillance that the Africans and the indigenous people had developed to now use against the Spanish. So I thought that was like, what? Okay. And with that information, I did want to add that right here in North Carolina, on Outer Banks, we had the P Islanders, and the P Islanders were a group of Africans who, right out of slavery, led by Richard Etheridge, who was a Civil War, a Black Civil War hero who fought in the Civil War, of course, and he was selected to work on one of the oh my God, the lighthouses out on the Outer Banks. The reason he was selected is because the Outer Banks was notorious for at the lighthouses, the staffs, the crews at the lighthouses were notorious for stealing from people who were in those shipwrecks. Outer Banks is the waterways out there are considered a graveyard, because of a ship graveyard, because of the geography of that area. If you've been out there, you've seen the sand dunes. So, as above the ground, you have below ground, and so it's very treacherous area for swimming, and for shipping. So, and especially prior to sonar, where they could actually navigate through these very treacherous areas. But where in Carolina Beach, it's smooth. And the boat designs for Africans were more aligned with that smooth the flatboat was better for beaches like Carolina, which is, it's flat and you can just row your boat right up on top of that area. That was closer to what the design of the beaches along the coast, the westward coast of Africa. So that when those shipwrecks happened, the white people would go and they would plunder those ships and they would steal all of the things that wash ashore, and it was a big problem. And so they had to find the government had to find, or North Carolina had to find somebody else. And so Richard Hetheridge was held in such high regard that they said, okay, you do it. And at first, when he formed his team, nobody white would join him. They're like, we're not doing this with you. We're not going to be on, join a black person who's in charge of our crew. No way. So they all quit. And so he had to, most of these lighthouses had black people there, but they were the cooks and the janitors and not actual lifeguard folks. So what he did is he gathered those guys up and he said, you guys, I will train you. We have a legacy out here in Outer Banks of being fishermen and being able to um navigate these waters. We know the waterways of the tidal waves and all of that of this area. So they organized. Well, what do white people do? They burn down the lighthouse. Okay. So they rebuilt it. So Mr. Etheridge decided that he was going to they rebuilt it, and he said, I'm going to train these folks to be lifeguards. Um, and and how to do rescue people from these boats. And so they said that he would go out in the middle of storms and he would take his crew out there, and they would, how do you turn boats that have been turned upside down right side up? How do you get people who have fallen out the boats back into the boats? They went through all of these procedures, and those procedures, just like the surveillance skills of Africans down in the south, the Sea Islands, was used to and flipped around. Richard Etheridge's skills were used as part of the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard took much of what he trained his people to do and turned and co-opted those that material and created the Coast Guard under Richard Etheridge and his crew. They said they never lost for every shipwreck. They never lost a person. They were able to save every person off of it, whose boats were shipwrecked, and they did not steal the stuff. Okay, so that's Black legacy for you. That's just and that's right here in North Carolina, off the coast of out on the Outer Banks. And I took my students down there for one of our St. Cooper journeys to visit them. Um, so now, the other thing that I wanted to mention is, and this one was, well, is going to baffle most of us because we know that, well, I think maybe there's a resurgence because women are embracing their hair, their natural texture of their hair. They're not as uh, worried about, their hair getting wet. And so hopefully we're evolving past this notion that Black people can't swim. But I grew up here in North Carolina with this idea that, Black people don't go in the water, and Black people don't do this, and Black people don't do that, and Black people can't swim. Well, what I read here is that during this time in South Carolina back in the 1700s, Africans were the ones praised for their agility and athleticism, for swimming and for mastering boats and for mastering fishing and all these other skills. They could attack and kill sharks. They were known for harpooning manta rays, wrestling alligators, and being highly proficient swimmers, compared to Europeans who, during the enslavement, could barely dog paddle. So this is Dr. Lynn Harris's uh, re- um, research. Africans were the lifeguards on the plantation, responsible for transporting tons of merchandise up and down waterways to market because of their navigational skills with boats and their skill. Yeah, so their skilled water boatsmen maneuvering, and but lifeguards, because they would Europeans were put them in charge. If they had to transport their children or transport their merchandise, they knew that Africans could, if there was a problem, they could dive off these ships or dive off these boats and get those things or save their children from alligators, from sharks, from what manta rays, and also um, make sure the merchandise get arrive safely. So it's really interesting to me um, that this information, when you hear this thing about black people can't swim and because we can't float, you have to, it should make us go and analyze why.
Yeah, I was going to pop
Right.
in for a second and everything. I know you
Yes.
still got a few minutes to go
Yeah.
and everything, but I was not sure because we showed it here at the Hatat Center not that long ago. But if you're not familiar, and if your listeners are not familiar, there is a book or a movie. It's called Whitewash, and it is actually about black surfers. So it's actually about black folk surfers in, I think it was Hawaii
Right.
and other parts and everything, but they were very active in the surf community, and it was African Americans that were surfing. So if you're not familiar with that movie called Whitewash, you should definitely check it out. So I'll let you go back to
Yes.
your show, but I
Yeah.
did know we showed that sometime back over here at the center. Might have even been one of the years that I was curating and everything, but
Yeah.
it was a very powerful documentary.
Well, thank you for that. And I also want to add to that that this year when well, I think it was 2020 when they did the Descendants movie on Netflix, that they're African Americans who are surfing, who are divers, scuba divers, who are going to historical sites looking for shipwrecks where Africans were on, and that's how the Clotilda down in Alabama was found. The oldest ship, one of the last African, ships that in 1861 to steal Africans off the continent of Africa from through the Benin area. So and the movie is, the book is called Barracoon, but it is called the Netflix video, I believe, is called Descendants. It's the descendants of the Africans who were brought here. It was an illegal activity because in 1800 early 1800s, you weren't supposed to be transporting back going back and forth to get slaves, but it was a dare. The people said, hey, I bet you can't do it, or you bet you won't do it. And so it was espionage. They went over, they snuck over there, and they came back. And the ship was called Clotilda. But African divers, scuba divers, were very actively involved in finding that slave ship and resurrecting it. And now they have a whole um, I think it's Africa Town in Alabama, and they are building historical site there for people to come and visit, which would be some, hopefully I'll get a chance to go there. But at any rate, it's always interesting to we know that Africans who did not swim, some of this these stereotypes have been used against us because we were not allowed to swim in pools. You had banning at the beaches, black people couldn't go to the beach. I think even in South Carolina, they had to come to a beach here in North Carolina. Black people were banned from those beaches at some point. So when they went from owning the property down at the beach to now being banned from swimming in the water, because there's a difference between black water and white water. Anyway, the ridiculousness of it, but that actually hindered our, it was a block in our tradition of folks who love to swim. And I'm going to add one more thing. When I was in college, I was the only black girl that passed the swim test at UNC Chapel Hill. So, because my dad liked to swim, so we have to go back and learn how to do these things. Um, but anyway, so that's all I've got today, and hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something and would do some research. as Baba introduced, about, Black people in surfing, Black people in swimming competitions, Black people in scuba diving, and make our reconnection with the water. Make It's a beautiful thing to make the reconnection with the water. Ashe. So,
I'm a Sya student. Of course, I walk into the sound of drums.
I'm a Sya student. Of course, I know my mother.
I'm a Sya student. Of course, I can play the drums.
I'm a Sya student. Of course, I can work with my hands.
I'm a Sya student.
You know how people love to enjoy food and don't understand how to flavor their food or how to replicate a meal? They're interested in supplements but don't know where to begin? Well, what I do is I take the guesswork out of enjoying flavor and wellness with my flavorful spice blends so that they can create delicious meals with healing benefits. Can Do Spice was created to help cooks at any level enjoy healing through food. Every spice blend was designed to give added health benefits of natural herbs. Every blend is complete. There's no need to add any additional spice for a delicious meal. Saving you time and money while adding supplements to your meals can be both tasty and fun. My earliest memories in the kitchen began with my father, Kenny Can Do Bond, so it was fitting that I would name this line after him. I have always looked to natural remedies to supplement the body, and I found myself hiding herbs and minerals in foods for my family. That's when it hit me. Everyone needs Can Do Spice. Everyone should be having this. It's an exclusive brand for cooks at any level who want to create flavorful dishes with healing benefits that can satisfy the body and soul. Add a little spice to your life. Give Can Do Spice a try.